I don't think anybody can deny that the world can be a very cruel place sometimes. I doubt I'd be able to find one person on this earth who hasn't gone through some level of trauma by the age of 30. Not many things are guaranteed in life, but one thing is for sure. If you are here living, then you will go through some amount of pain and suffering. For centuries, people have been trying to interpret the meaning behind this part of our existence. And I started to as well, the same time that I started to get into self-improvement. I think this happens to many of us within this realm of learning. We want to know optimal ways of existing and viewing the world, and so naturally we become interested in philosophy as a byproduct. I'm no philosopher myself, but I have studied a few philosophers when it comes to the subject of life and suffering. On the one hand, you have the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, who was a pessimist at heart. Basically, what Schopenhauer believes is that humans' will to live that keeps us thrusting forward is ultimately doomed, and that this leads to a life of nothing but suffering and tragedy. Not even happiness can be viewed as a positive to him, because that is only a momentary cessation of pain and deprivation. We swing like a pendulum between boredom and suffering, and the only solution to this problem is to live in isolation, not get married, and get rid of all your desires. Kind of like a Buddhist monk. If you've been following me even for a little while, you know that I don't like to view our existence this way. Instead, my philosophy on life is more so correlated with that of Nietzsche. Unless you're 14 years old or you live under a rock, you've probably heard the name Friedrich Nietzsche before. Nietzsche was a 19th century German philosopher known for, well, his philosophy. Nietzsche was actually greatly influenced by Schopenhauer, and he too agrees that life is full of suffering. But his way of approaching this suffering was completely different. To explain the polarity between these two philosophers' ways of thinking, we can look at something that they were both deeply fascinated with: Greek tragedies. Both of these philosophers showed great interest in Greek tragedies, as they thought they were one of the best ways of depicting the reality of life. That life is, in fact, tragic. But while Schopenhauer used these as a way to condemn life, Nietzsche saw this as a cause for celebration. It was a way of saying yes to life, even among its most brutal misfortunes, and finding meaning within the suffering. Before I get into the danger territory with real philosophers who are going to tell me,
well, actually Schopenhauer and Nietzsche thought this,
let me just talk about a beautiful work of art that is my favorite depiction of the struggles of life and how to handle them, and was strongly impacted by Nietzschean philosophy. Part of that work of art is right behind me on my computer screen, and also on my forearm, which I'm going to explain at the end of this video. That piece of art is the manga called Berserk. If you aren't familiar with Berserk, it is a dark fantasy manga written and illustrated by the late Kentaro Miura. I had first been introduced to Berserk through the movie adaptations that are on Netflix, and I thoroughly enjoyed them. But these only covered a single arc from the manga, the Golden Age, and left out many parts of the story. And I wasn't even aware of this until one of my friends suggested that I read the entire manga, and so I decided to embark on the 364 chapters of this masterpiece. And I can confidently say that it changed my entire outlook on life. Berserk follows the story of a man named Guts, otherwise known as the Struggler. The reason behind this nickname becomes apparent within the first chapter of Guts' backstory. Under the dead body of its mother, the baby made its birthing cries, cradled in a mire of blood and afterbirth. Yep, he was born under the corpse of his hung mother. From the minute he was born into this world, Guts was struggling. He never knew his parents and miraculously survived when he was saved by a mercenary band led by what would come to be his father figure, Gambino. But even his adopted father figure would soon come to reveal to Guts that he wishes he never rescued him and has actually always hated him. Eventually, Guts would come to find himself alone in blood once again. Up until he was a teenager, he lived as a mercenary, taking out enemies and working for other armies to make his bread. Guts derived his only meaning in life through his sword. No matter what happened, he always had his sword by him to help him get through the battles he had with other armies and himself. During one particular mercenary attack, a man named Griffith was taken back by his display of strength and became interested in recruiting him. I really don't want to spoil any big parts of the story, but basically Guts is forced to join Griffith's mercenary called the Band of the Hawk, and this is the first time since his adopted father that he becomes attached to something other than his sword. And it's the first time where he feels like he truly belongs to something. He finally has a group to call his own. Guts now has something bigger to fight for. He has people within this band of the Hawk that he deeply cares about. After a while, this leads him to start questioning his own purpose and goals in life and where he's trying to go. But the triumphs of this band and his connections are short-lived and ends with one of the most gruesome and horrifying arc climaxes in all of fiction. That brief period of some sense of happiness fades, and the rest of the story is a never-ending struggle for Guts. But even after all of that, after everything he's gone through and continues to go through, he keeps moving forward. Why would someone whose life very clearly has no hope for any sort of tranquility struggle against his fate of a miserable death? Because even with that fact, he finds a reason to keep on living. At one part of the story, his reason is definitely not the best one, but Guts is a character constantly growing and reevaluating his mission and values. And he eventually goes towards the path of struggling towards perhaps not a better life, but one that can save others. It's the story of a man who loses everything in the most horrific of ways multiple times and has no escape from the tortures and suffering of life, but decides to keep going. As humans, we are so attracted to stories like these that are filled with tragedy, even if they don't have a happy ending, because within these stories is immense beauty. What kind of a story is one without sadness, negativity, and the heartbreaks of everyday life? That certainly is not a story worth reading. I think our magnetic energy towards these stories reveals something that we all feel within ourselves, but don't care to admit or accept. And that is that we all like suffering to some extent. If we were to find that life is fair, just, and made for you to be comfortable, I think most of us would go crazy. And yet we so much so try to reject this guaranteed part of life. We wish the pain of life would end entirely and we will finally be put out of our misery. But no matter what level of financial wealth or relationship status you reach, some level of tragedy will strike upon you. You will lose loved ones. You will experience the pains of sorrow, depression, anger, and anxiety. And to help quell these certainties, we build up emotional walls so that we will experience these emotions less. We don't allow ourselves to be intimate with others. We play it safe and don't take risks, from pursuing our passions to asking out someone we have a crush on. We don't put ourselves out there. We stay out of danger. Because if we do this, then we think maybe there's a chance that I won't get hurt. But in the end, no matter what, you're still going to suffer, but for different reasons. To think and act this way, I believe, is to completely reject life itself. And I have certainly been down that route. I've tried to detach myself from desires at several points in my life, but most notably after I've gotten my heart broken. I told myself that this is it. This is the last girlfriend that I'll ever have. And for a while, this acceptance helped ease the pain. But then I started to question if that was what I even wanted. Do I, as a human being, wish for no more serious relationships with others? Or is this just a coping mechanism so I don't get hurt again? I started to get lonely, especially when I was living in Las Vegas for a few months at the start of this year and I had no friends. I was stuck in a gated community with no car and just one other roommate. During this time, I actually turned back to Berserk and started rereading the story, and it helped me break down those emotional walls once again. I think deep down, I do want some form of a relationship like that, and I've just decided to accept it. It doesn't mean that I'm trying really hard to get it, but I'm open to the possibility, because now I'm open to the suffering that inevitably comes from forming relationships with others. I've decided to say yes to all aspects of life, whether that is feeling pain, sorrow, sadness. I accept it and I allow myself to feel it fully, because that is experiencing life fully. Saying yes to life, even in its strangest and harshest problems. The will to life rejoicing in its own inexhaustibility through the sacrifice of its highest types. Not to escape horror and pity, but rather over and above all horror and pity, so that you yourself may be the eternal joy in becoming. The joy that includes even the eternal joy in negating. This is what Berserk and the journey of life is all about. It's about finding some sort of meaning within the tragedies and celebrating that as a necessary for our evolution as a human being. Listen, I know that the root of all my sufferings come from desire. I desire to have a large YouTube channel and to continue growing and seeing new things. If my desires, like continuing this YouTube channel, make a positive impact on others, then I'll continue suffering until the day I die. And so now, every once in a while, I'll come back to Berserk's story to be reminded of the beauty behind the struggles, horrors, and terrors of life. When I first heard about 𝙬𝙗𝙬𝙧's passing this past May, it was the first time that I genuinely mourned someone that I had never met before. And it revealed to me just how much of an impact that his writings and his illustrations had on me. And because of that, I knew I had to do something or get something in memory of his passing. And so that's why I now have this tattoo of Guts on my forearm. When I look into Guts' eyes, it's a reminder to just keep moving forward, no matter what life throws at you, and to see suffering for what it is, an integral part of experiencing the joys of life. While the future for Berserk is currently unknown, I feel as though an improper ending is very fitting for the story. It's as if it's 𝙬𝙗𝙬𝙧's way of telling us that maybe our own lives will never get a proper ending and that the struggle may never stop, but it doesn't mean the journey isn't worth going through. In the description, I'm going to leave for you ways for you to get into Berserk, because I really want people to get into it and be impacted as I was by this magnificent piece of work by 𝙬𝙬𝙬𝙧. So check that out, and thank you to all the patrons on this channel on Patreon. This is a platform where I'm putting out exclusive videos and podcasts that can't be found anywhere else. If you want to check that out, the link is in the description as well, patreon.com/ColeHastings. And that is it for this video. Accept all parts of life, allow yourself to feel the struggle, feel the suffering, and celebrate it, find meaning within it, and let's just keep moving forward, keep struggling.